Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Action Comics issue 1017. And a few things right out of the gate have to be said about this issue. It takes place before Event Leviathan issue 6 and before the Justice League issue number 36. Now that's important to note because it's very obvious in this issue that Lois Lane has not done her article yet on Leviathan, revealing that Leviathan is in fact Mark Shaw, the previous or the former Manhunter. So that's significant because if you don't know that and you've been following Event Leviathan and you've been following the events in Justice League with the Doom War, you might be a little bit confused. So you need to know that this issue does take place before Event Leviathan number 6 and Justice League number 36. Now, of course, there's no editor's note that I could find that indicates that. I put that together in just reading the story because it becomes fairly obvious that it has to take place prior to Justice League number 36. How do I know that? Because the issue starts off immediately with the Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, battling the Legion of Doom, and Superman appears to be soundly defeated. And as Superman appears to be soundly defeated along with Batman and Wonder Woman, the Legion of Doom demands their surrender, their complete surrender. And they ask for a genuine surrender. Superman offers to surrender himself if they let the people go and they let Batman and Wonder Woman go. But no, Luthor says, the apex predator Luthor says, no, we want a genuine surrender. Which right away seems rather odd because it shows a lack of consistency between the characterization of Luthor in the pages of Action Comics compared to the pages of Justice League, because it's very obvious that the apex predator Luthor wants to kill Superman, kill the Trinity, wipe out the Justice League. He would not be asking for a surrender of any kind. He just wouldn't. That's not how Luthor has been portrayed. That's not what Luthor was going for. Luthor has been moving, ever since Luthor became the apex predator, he wants to wipe out and kill the members of the Justice League. He believes he did the same to Martian Manhunter, who has been killed by Apex Luthor, although he's probably just absorbed by Apex Luthor. The fact remains is that under the influence of Perpetua, Apex Luthor wants to kill. He's not going to be looking for any kind of genuine surrender. That's complete nonsense, nor would the members of the Legion of Doom. Now, having said that, it is what it is. It's inconsistency. You got to believe it in order to make this work. And very clearly, the Justice League are they're just in the opening pages for shock value to finally infuse this issue with some action when for the most part there just isn't a lot of action in it, because all that happen. I'm going to summarize what happens here, because as soon as Luthor demands genuine surrender from Superman, we right away jump back a number of hours. We jump back a number of hours and we never go back to it except for a newspaper article at the end that says apparently the Justice League were rescued by the forces of Young Justice and the other members of the Justice League showed up and the battle against the Legion of Doom was put off for another day. So that's all we know about that. So once again, the action that we get from Bendis in Action Comics is a complete non-resolution. It's there simply, it's forced in there for shock value, but there's no resolution that comes to it. And there doesn't really seem to be a point to it other than just to, I don't know, just to suggest that Superman's a busy guy. I guess that's a reason. But again, it's why don't you tell your own story? Why don't you focus on the action in your own story, Bendis? Why don't you put some excitement and action in your own story as opposed to trying to take plot lines from other You're the Villain plot lines in order to put some action in your own story. Make your own story in Action Comics contain action instead of pirating Snyder's Justice League Legion of Doom Justice arc. I mean, that's just a little suggestion there. Also, the reference to in the newspaper article of the Young Justice being in this, showing up and helping the Justice League, it seems to me to be false advertising because they in fact never did show up. But it is what it is. Now, where does this issue go? Well, what's the point of this issue? Well, this issue takes place prior to Event Leviathan number 6. So my first question is, what's the point of it? And it also takes place prior to Justice League number 36. So we know that because in Justice League 36 that came out last week, all of the members of the Legion of Doom were incapacitated and defeated by Perpetua. But Perpetua betrayed all members of the Legion of Doom except for Luther, who's her favorite son, so to speak. And so all members of the Legion of Doom are incapacitated by Perpetua and their energies are being channeled through the Seven Forces and are being channeled through Perpetua herself and through Apex Luther. So that's how we know this definitely takes place prior to Justice League issue 36. Now, having said that, what happens in this issue is Clark Kent is sitting there. He's interviewing Miss Leon. Now, he's interviewing Miss Leon because she's the new owner of the Daily Planet. She's kind of a mysterious woman. Clark does not seem to know that Miss Leon is is actually the leader of the Invisible Mafia. So as Clark Kent, he's interviewing her. As he's interviewing Miss Leon, all of a sudden there's a meteor that seems to shoot by the Daily Planet. Clark Kent obviously takes off, chases it as Superman, stops it, but it ends up being sort of a ruse by Leviathan, by the forces of Leviathan, and it transports Superman all the way to Gorilla City. And that seems to be planned. The plan was to get Superman out of Metropolis, away from Metropolis as farther as he possibly can. And that ruse was intended to distract Superman while Leviathan attacked the Invisible Mafia, which is no longer invisible anymore. Superman finally makes it back to Metropolis from Gorilla City, and when he gets back, he goes back into the Daily Planet and he begins to write a story. He's very angry. He's pissed off. He knows that Leviathan, obviously that it was a ruse by Leviathan to get him out of the city, but for what purpose, he wasn't really sure. What was the purpose? Something is up. And it becomes very clear why Leviathan wanted to distract Superman and get him out of the city, and it's because the Ace Club blows up. Leviathan attacks the Ace Club. Now, the Ace Club is where Robinson Goode and Miss Leon had that was the secret headquarters of the Invisible Mafia. Miss Leon and Robinson Goode, in previous issues, when they would meet and talk, they would meet at the Ace Club. And as the reporter Trish Q notes, that even the mayor of Metropolis has shown up at the Ace Club on more than one occasion. So it was clear that maybe there's some corruption going on there between the mayor of Metropolis and the Invisible Mafia, ran by Miss Leon, and of course there is the Red Cloud, who is Miss Leon's sort of, I guess, bodyguard, and that's Robinson Goode. Now, Robinson Goode has been missing apparently for about 3 days. She's persona non grata. She's been missing for a number of days. Perry White's upset that Robinson Goode's not around. He wants to know where she is. He's used to his reporters disappearing and then coming back, but he says 3 days is usually after 3 days he begins to contemplate firing them, and he's concerned because where'd she go? Now, apparently somebody's been probably texting, probably it was Miss Leon that's been texting Perry White without, through her own means to suggest that Robinson Goode is actually, on assignment somewhere. But in any event, we don't really know where. We don't really know where Robinson Goode is. We know that as the Red Cloud, she seemed to go against the Invisible Mafia, or Red Cloud. She seems to be against Miss Leon now. I'm not really sure. It's kind of a little bit of a mess. But all we know is Leviathan now is attacking. Leviathan is attacking the Invisible Mafia. Now, the question then becomes, Clark and Lois then have to figure out why. Why would the Leviathan attack the Invisible Mafia? Why would they care? Why would Leviathan, which contains all the various disgruntled former members of spy agencies, why would they, as Leviathan, get together to attack one of the most well-structured, organized crime syndicates in all of America? Why would Leviathan attack the Invisible Mafia? Well, Lois Lane and Clark both conclude that it must be for Luther, and Leviathan obviously wants control of Luther. They want to get to Luther. The Invisible Mafia has some connection to Luther, or Leviathan must think that. And it appears that's what Luther and Lois Lane, that's what Clark Kent and Lois Lane seem to think. Because Superman's very frustrated. He knows that it was a distraction, that the meteor was a distraction to get him out of Metropolis, and that distraction allowed Leviathan to attack the headquarters of the Invisible Mafia, being the Ace Club. And he gets there and he talks to Chief Moore, the redhead female chief, the redhead woman chief there, she's very frustrated because she knows some games are being played here. She knows that there's corruption going on, and she knows that there was all these fires beginning in the city. If you recall, at the beginning of Action Comics Bendis's run, there was all these fires that were started and happening all over Metropolis. Those were all distractions created by the Invisible Mafia to take up Superman's time while they did their own illegal activities. That was all part of the Invisible Mafia stuff. Now, so Clark and Lois are very frustrated, and they conclude that it must be for Luthor. So Leviathan and Invisible Mafia now, and this is before the events, this is before event Leviathan issue 6. So this is before they know that Leviathan is actually Mark Shaw. And they're already concluding that Leviathan must want to get to Luthor, and they believe that taking out the Invisible Mafia is important, that they're going to war with each other because of the connection to Lex Luthor. I'm not really sure, I don't really understand that, and I don't understand why Clark and Lois, I don't understand their logic. Perhaps some of you guys can help me there. What would be the logic of Clark and Lois thinking that Leviathan and the Invisible Mafia are going to war over Lex Luthor? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because it became very clear, and it's been a well-established plot point, that Luthor gave up all his holdings, all his financial holdings, to become the apex predator. He gave up all his holding, and he killed himself. He basically killed off his Luthor identity to become the apex predator. So he doesn't really have a connection to Metropolis anymore. He's no longer, he's thinking bigger. He's thinking in multiversal terms. He's not thinking about being a big businessman in Metropolis. That's small potatoes. Lex Luthor is the apex predator now for the entire multiverse. So, and I would think by now this is fairly common knowledge in the mainstream DC universe. And so, especially, and Miss Leon of all people should know that, and Leviathan, surely to God, would know that by now as well. So this doesn't really work, and the whole thing seems very convoluted. There's been really no progression of the plot line here in any meaningful way. This still remains very, very boring, very, very boring. What's the point of this? I don't understand why. Like, what are we supposed to get excited about? Who cares? Who cares that Leviathan is ill-defined? We have a spy, Leviathan, trying to take out the Invisible Mafia. Who cares? The Invisible Mafia weren't that big a deal to begin with. Leviathan is a joke. That's a stab, because we already know how Event Leviathan ends, so we know he's a joke character. We know he's just a disgruntled spy guy. Whoop-de-doo. He hasn't really done much damage. He's just been, we got a bunch of talking heads in Event Leviathan number 6, and now we get this Action Comics 1017, and nothing happens in it. And the action that does happen in it is forced. It's very forced. Where Bendis deliberately puts a battle between the Trinity and the Legion of Doom in the first few pages, completely out of sync with what's happening in the Justice League, by the way. It doesn't line up. It can't really line up. But he does that, and he forces it in just so we get some action happening in a comic book called Action Comics. Now, I get that, and I guess I can accept that, but it's sad and it's pathetic, because it never shows the resolution. It shows Batman. It doesn't even show Superman, how Superman got out of it. How did the Trinity get out of that situation? Aside from the fact that Lex Luthor would never allow them to genuinely surrender, as he asks them to do, as he demands that they do. He would kill them. That's what the apex predator does. He's a killer. He's not the same Lex Luthor. So Bendis is not, he's not getting the characterization right. If Bendis has been reading the pages of Justice League, he's got to know that Lex Luthor is not about asking the Justice League to surrender anymore. He wants to kill them and wipe them out. He even said that in Justice League 36 that came out last week. He says, as he's sitting there in front of the Hall of Justice, he's basically telling Batman, you guys can come out and surrender. Not that it's going to prevent me from making you suffer horrible deaths. He basically said that. And we kind of know that. And so this thing it's not really adding up. But again, even if I forgive that and let that go, the whole thing here doesn't seem to be going anywhere. This is such a boring investigation. What are we supposed to conclude from this? So what? I mean, I ask this, so what? Who cares that Leviathan and the Invisible Mafia have some connection to Lex Luthor, or that they want some... First of all, none of them are connected to Lex Luthor. None of them have any control over Lex Luthor. None of them do. None of them do. Apex Luthor is doing his own thing. Leviathan, I'm sure, knows that. Leviathan must know about the offers that Luthor's been making to all kinds of different people, including Miss Leon. I mean, this is just nonsense at this point. This has been very, very badly put together. There is potential here. If Bendis had done some setup if Apex Luthor does have some proposal that he made to Leviathan, or if he did make some deeper, if some profound proposal to Leviathan or Miss Leon, this has potential. But I don't think Apex Luthor did that, did he? Did I miss that somewhere? I think Leviathan spoke to Miss Leon. Does Apex Luthor even care about Leviathan? Why would he care about a guy who's just a disgruntled former spy, putting all the former disgruntled spy workers together to form Leviathan and to what? Blow up a bunch of buildings and no one actually dies? I mean, has Bendis forgotten that we've read Event Leviathan? We know nothing happens. We know it's boring. We know that Leviathan can be defeated by Batgirl. Whoop-de-doo. Come on. I don't know. This is astonishing. Now, the other thing here is the art by John Romita Jr. I'm not gonna, John Romita Jr. is not my cup of tea. But it's John Romita Jr. It's serviceable. I still understood what was happening in this story. I'm not a big fan of the art. Miss Leon doesn't look like Miss Leon, but there's all kinds of things that don't quite work artistically for me. But art's subjective, so I'm not going to say much about that other than it's not my cup of tea. But John Romita Jr. Some people like his stuff, so all the power to him. But that didn't detract from the story. Although I will say that me not being a huge fan of the art, it really magnified the deficiencies of the story, of which this had quite a few. Now, I will say, if I'm going to try to put some lipstick on this pig of an issue, I will say that we're finally getting all the players sort of are moving into play a little bit more. We finally saw Chief Moore back into play, the redheaded chief. We've Fire Chief. We get her back, and we haven't seen her in a while. We get Trish Q being more active, interacting with Jimmy Olsen. We get Lois and Clark finally maybe trying to draw some connections and act like reporters, which they actually are. So we get that aspect of it again. But, it should be emphasized, what we're not getting is action. And again, this is called Action Comics, and the action we are getting is forced and inconsistent with other comic books. But I guess that's par for the course on Bendis. Now, I will say that the dialogue never bothered me much this issue. I think the dialogue was okay, but maybe I've become so indoctrinated and used to Bendis now that I've stopped complaining about it, and I'm slowly being taken over by nanites or the virus of the Batman who laughs, and I'm now infected. But in any event, it is what it is. Guys, tell me what you think of Action Comics 1017. Hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. And until next time, Comic Boom, out.